Thanks very much, and we're very pleased to have with us today the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Ivan Simonovic, who has just gotten back from South Sudan. Mr. Simonovic, thanks.
Thank you. I have visited South Sudan after a year, though the scale of the conflict has recently declined. There are more people on our protection sites, now over 100,000 people. The number of displaced and refugees has continued to grow and has now reached 2 million, 1.5 million displaced and 500,000 refugees. There are thousands of civilians dead, and new humanitarian law and human rights law violations have been committed by both sides. I met with people whose whole families have been executed, primarily due to their ethnicity. Women and girls who were taken as sex slaves after their husbands have been killed, and heavily armed child soldiers in Bentiu. Besides Juba, I visited Bentiu and Malakal, places that were worst affected by hostilities and had most casualties. Besides the conflict between SPLA and SPLA in opposition, there are many local conflicts across the country between tribes or even between clans of the same tribe. They may include looting and cattle raiding, but some mutual killings and sexual violence as well. Millions of dollars that could have been directed towards social development have been wasted on conflicts. Due to suspended economic trends, millions have also been lost by neighboring states, and the international community has been investing in emergency relief instead of capacity building and development. However, there are also some positive developments. There is an increasing thirst for peace and justice among a broad spectrum of society. Government is also increasingly acknowledging its human rights obligations. I welcome the ratifications of a series of international important human rights treaties, significant development for this young country. It has been agreed at the meeting with President Kiir that in the following days the ratification instruments, and I have copies of them with me, will be deposited with the Secretary General. Respect for the rights contained within them will then become international obligation of the country. There is broad acknowledgement of the need to break the cycle of impunity with a number of concrete measures taken to address accountability. As one civil society representative told me, peace has always died when we ignore justice. As you may know, the African Union has undertaken a groundbreaking initiative with the establishment of Commission of Inquiry into Human Rights Violations committed in South Sudan. Their report has been recently submitted to the African Union Peace and Security Council, but its consideration has been deferred until the imminent conclusion of the peace agreement, as Peace and Security Council put it. I'm hopeful that the African Union will soon publicly release the report and support implementation of its findings. President Kiir also assured me that the results of national investigations into human rights violations presented to him in December will also be publicly released soon. I welcome accountability references in the recently signed Arusha and Addis agreements. As I made clear during my last visit to the country, meaningful accountability for serious human rights violations is the only way to prevent their reoccurrence. And as Secretary General said in Addis, you can have both peace and justice. They are mutually reinforcing. In the meantime, I encourage confidence-building measures between the parties. These would include free access to detainees, cooperation in tracing missing persons, and release of conflict-related detainees by both sides, hopefully under all-for-all formula. There is also a need to improve security and justice system, but it will not be easy. In Juba, I met with the Chief Justice and Supreme Court justices, and they informed me of quite limited number of judges and prosecutors, not more than 100 to 200 judges altogether, and outside of the capital situation is even worse. For example, in Eastern Equatorial State, larger than many European countries, there are just 2 prosecutors. The police chief told me that about 70% of his police officials are illiterate. The UN does want to support their capacity building, but only after the peace agreement and after those who have been involved in human rights violations are vetted, investigated, prosecuted, and appropriately punished in line with international standards. For peace to be sustainable, there is a need for a free and inclusive dialogue among all social actors. Restriction of freedom of expression against local media are particularly disturbing. There were some journalists detained, newspapers have been confiscated, and some closed, and the radio station was also briefly closed. Although it may take President Kiir and Dr. Machar to end a war and sign a peace agreement, it takes many more to ensure sustainable peace, and the ongoing peace process should, in order to be sustainable, involve elders, religious leaders, youth, women, and other civil society actors. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Everyone, please raise your hand and identify yourselves. Yes, Maggie, then Sherwin, then Matthew.
Mr. Simonovic, thank you on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association for this timely briefing after your trip. On Friday, I believe, when you were still in Juba, you spoke to the press there about a campaign, a month of rape campaign. I wasn't clear on who carried it out. Was it armed groups, the army, who in particular? And also, I know it's the High Commissioner's office who keeps track of the death toll in Syria. Has your office kept track of the death toll in some way? Can you confirm? Because I've seen numbers all over the place from 10,000 to 50,000 in the South Sudan conflict. So if you have any kind of verifiable numbers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This violence that I was mentioning on Thursday, it was a violence that is not related to the current conflict between SPLA and SPLA in opposition. I was referring to violence in a Rumbek area. We are still verifying findings about it, but it seems to be that it was proclaimed somewhere in August, 30 days of violence. Some were interpreting that as also 30 days of rape, and it seems that a number of victims have been affected. So it is a communal violence. In fact, it's a violence between 2 clans of the same tribe. So it was not related to this violence, but something quite local. In some other areas of the country, there are also some other forms of violence, conflict-related one, quite often related to cattle raiding activities. On the death toll, I did discuss with a lot of regional government interlocutors, civil society. It is difficult to have a precise number. We do have a number of documented deaths. The death toll was highest in the states and in the towns which were changing control many times. I'm referring to Bentiu and Malakal, which were worst affected, as well as the states where they are located, Unity State and Upper Nile State. Also, Jonglei was quite affected. And although I cannot speak about precise numbers, after first violence that was taking place in Juba, then it moved to these other states. And we certainly are speaking about thousands and likely tens of thousands. However, I can't be more precise than that.
Thank you. Sherwin Bryce Peace, South African Broadcasting. Sir, you talk about the relationship between justice, the need for justice, and I wonder then what is the relationship between that need for justice and the leadership of both these SPLA factions? I mean, how far does this go? Does it go right to the top? The Secretary General himself has spoken about the failure of leadership in this conflict. So I wonder, does justice, the justice you speak of, pertain to the likes of Riek Machar and Salva Kiir?
Well, I think that it's quite clear UN's view that nobody is above justice. But speaking about their commitment to support accountability to processes, I have talked to Dr. Machar in Addis. I have talked to 3 ministers who were political detainees previously. And in Juba, I did talk to President Kiir. It was encouraging that all of them were clear that there needs to be justice. They were speaking about accountability, including also criminal proceedings. There may have been some different emphasis in sense of timing of those proceedings, but the commitment was explicit and clear. Concerning recent agreements, both Arusha agreement and the agreement reached in Juba had provisions dealing with accountability. In Arusha, the provision is that people who were involved in grave violations could not have neither SPLM, United SPLM positions, nor any state functions. And in the Addis agreement, there are provisions speaking about transitional justice process that will be in the country launched, as well as provision about hybrid tribunal, including some South Sudanese lawyers as well as other African experts. So it is encouraging to have those provisions in the peace agreements, and I sincerely hope that in final peace agreement we will have very explicit references on accountability. It is important to note that also everybody agrees that accountability this time is needed not to have history repeating. Because through the history we had cases where, although violations were clear and well known, there was no accountability, and it has encouraged violations to continue.
So if I may just follow up, you would then welcome these accountability measures investigating the very leadership that is going to strike the deal you talk about? Who's going to hold the leadership accountable? If they are the ones striking or setting the parameters?
Speculate and identify the ones who are accountable. What we need to have is an agreement on institutions that will be deciding on accountability, and of course that nobody is above the law.
Matthew.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks for the briefing. I wanted to know first about this. There's a local, or the South Sudanese government inquiry that was done by Justice John Wool McKeck. What can you say about that? Do you think that has some potential to bring justice? Do I understand you correctly that the UN believes that the AU Commission of Inquiry report should be released, at this time or as soon as possible? And then just finally, I wanted to ask about Peter Gadet, which I know there's some dispute about whether he's still part of the Riek Machar opposition or not. There have been various allegations about the killing of his second-in-command, shooting down a UN helicopter. Were you able to speak to him? Do you view him as part of that unified opposition or as a third force out there? Thank you.
Let me say first something on South Sudan investigations. In fact, there were more than one investigations. There was police investigation, military investigations. However, when discussed with President Kiir, he confirmed that the results of these investigations were included in so-called presidential investigation. The results of that investigations were presented to President Kiir in December, and he explicitly confirmed that results of the investigations will be made public. So he wasn't saying when, he was saying that he's giving them a close look, but that was encouraging to see. I cannot comment investigation that I am not sufficiently familiar with. On Commission of Inquiry, or so-called Obasanjo Report. Obasanjo Report was submitted to the African Union in Addis. I had the opportunity to discuss it with President Obasanjo. However, it was not formally presented to the Peace and Security Council because, as Peace and Security Council interpreted it, because of imminent finalization of the peace agreement. And what I certainly hope is that the release of the report will be very soon, of course, presentation to the Council and its release. Last time when I was in Sudan, I have spoken with Mr. Gadet by phone. This time I had no contacts with him, and I wouldn't be able to confirm the level of his respect of command chain leading to Dr. Machar.
Kevin?
Is that always equally so? Can you say whether one side is more blameworthy than another? And also, do you think that the negotiators, IGAD in particular, are serving the cause of accountability and human rights protection in South Sudan by setting multiple deadlines that are never kept, that are never met? There's threats always, if you don't settle by X date, we're going to act, we're going to impose sanctions. This has happened, I think, at least 4 times, and nothing has occurred. Do you have any comment on that?
Gladly. Let me start with IGAD. I did spoke in Addis to Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia and to some IGAD ambassadors when in Juba and attended some Secretary General meetings. IGAD representatives are increasingly nervous, and they are doing whatever they can to encourage sides to finalize peace agreement. The document signed in Addis was primarily of a procedural nature. It was setting up the dynamics of the finalization of peace talks and transitional government. However, there was some disappointment that they did not tackle the crucial remaining issues regarding power sharing arrangement and security. On the issue, you ask also an issue about an issue of reporting. Could you repeat so that I can fully reply to your question?
Well, just back on the first point, though, do you have any reaction, any comment to IGAD's multiple deadlines that result in no action? Shouldn't they be backing up their threats to act? The other question was, it's often said when there is assessment of human rights violations in South Sudan that both sides are to blame.
Yeah.
I'm asking whether one side is more to blame than another.
What is on us is to try to accurately identify what has happened and impartially then publicly report on that one. As you may remember, we have produced one comprehensive report, and after that we had some partial reporting, the last of reports being the one dealing with Bor and Bentiu. But I can announce that quite soon we will have another comprehensive report. And we will not be saying that one side or the other was more involved, but will be describing all allegations that we are aware of, trying to get to the bottom of developments. On IGAD's deadlines, I would not be recommending the IGAD on what to do, but I did notice that they were nervous with some deadlines that they were setting up being disrespected. What effects will that have to their political behavior? We shall see.
Yes, the front.
Can you speak on the status of conditions at the unmanned bases that are housing displaced persons? And have any of these new human rights violations you mentioned been committed by people within or near those unmanned facilities?
Concerning UNMISS, we are having, I said, over 100,000, some 102,000 people that are protected in our camp. Some of them are being there continuously. Some of them are moving in and out of camps. My assessment would be that it's about 50,000 of them in Bentiu, about 30,000 in Juba, about 20,000 in Malakal, and there are some in Bor and elsewhere, but these three places have highest concentration of POCs. I visited all three POC sites, and there were some violations taking place on our camps. And if you have such a number of people squeezed in this tight camp area where they can be, it's quite expectable that there would be some stealings, that there would be even some major crimes committed, including sexual violence or some physical violence. This is a difficult and sensitive situation, but we have established within our camps some holding areas for those persons. Why are some of those persons not simply transferred to South Sudan authorities? Because some of them do not want to be leaving protection of civilian sites because they are afraid for their security. There are attempts to sign certain agreement with South Sudan authorities on handling these cases. Concerning situation in different areas and in different protection of civilian sites, it's quite different. For example, we have in Bentiu and in Malakal, almost all civilians that are in those towns, they are spending their nights on our protection of civilian sites. Now, we can assess that their motives are certainly to quite an extent security, but also it may be also motivated by being taken care in sense of food, in sense of medicines, in our protection of civilian sites. I think it's important for us to provide to the ones who do not want to stay on our sites but want to return to their homes, to provide food and medicines. However, security is something we cannot guarantee. We can just incite forces that are in the control of certain area to provide for such security.
Yes, Mike.
Mr. Simonovic, on the accountability issue, does your office have a preference for how it is handled? Because South Sudan is such a young country and they're still struggling to build so many institutions. Is your office confident that their justice system is adequate to handle trying some of these crimes, which may amount to very serious crimes? You mentioned this hybrid tribunal as one possibility that the government mentioned, but what are you looking for? What's your office looking for in terms of the accountability mechanism?
The discussion on ways how UN can support accountability is still an ongoing one. There definitely is a support of accountability, and UN will be supporting accountability mechanisms. I can, because the discussion is still going on, share with you my view on accountability and what are necessary elements. I think that one important starting point is that we must have a reliable legal proceedings. And it implies that you have a certain level of impartiality and certain level of expertise. At the moment, the problem with expertise is a serious one in the country itself. So there will be a need for support from outside for accountability mechanisms to be successful. On the other hand, another element is the issue of witness protection. As is situation right now in South Sudan, it's very difficult to ensure necessary witness protection, especially in high-profile cases. And finally, the third criterion that I would have in mind is also that for both political reasons and capacity-building reasons, it's important that South Sudanese lawyers are also included in these processes. Is it possible to find one model that would satisfy all those criteria in a balanced way? I'm not too sure. Perhaps we can have certain models for some higher profiled cases, and the other model that would be also related to transitional justice mechanisms for some other cases. I think that that may be the line of thinking that is reflected in the Addis Agreement, speaking about transitional justice mechanism ran nationally, and the need for some sort of hybrid tribunal with inclusion of, besides South Sudanese lawyers, of other African experts. I think it's a promising start, but it's still very abstract. I think that for the final peace accord, we need more explicit provisions for the accountability mechanisms. But I can already say that both OHCHR and UN will be supportive of accountability mechanisms, but it requires some further discussion.
Yes, in the back.
Beside the big fight between opposition and the government, there's a local violence between communities and tribe, as you just say. What, according to what you saw and listened to it in the country, what might be the real causes of those violence, and what does the government, South Sudan leaders, and even UN are doing to prevent that situation before it becomes a national big crisis?
Could you speak a little bit louder? I didn't fully understand your question.
Beside the big fight between government and the opposition, there's a local violence between communities and tribe, as you just mentioned before. And what does according to what you saw and listened to it in the country, what might be the real causes of those violence, and what does the government, South Sudan leaders, and even UN are doing to prevent the situation before it become a big national fight?
Yes, you are quite right. There is, besides opposition and government, I would tell more precisely SPLA and SPLA in opposition violence. There are quite numerous models or quite numerous occasions of violence throughout the country that are not related to that specific conflict. There are some conflicts between herders who are bringing their cattle through areas where there is some harm done to crops, and this is sometimes a cause for conflicts. There is also a tradition of cattle raiding, which is also related to tradition of having to pay a certain amount of cattle to have a marriage, to pay for a bride. So it's something very much related to some practices. And of course, this cattle raiding is quite often a cause of a serious conflict that may include also mutual killings as well. What is being done is, of course, limited because of the current situation where priority is given to this major conflict that is causing deaths of thousands and tens of thousands. However, there was some progress, and it could have recently been observed with so-called a Cobra faction, when that there was an agreement and the release of child soldiers has started as facilitated by UNICEF. So the activities in other parts of the country that are less affected by this major conflict and addressing some human rights violations that are related to some specific local circumstances is ongoing, but I do hope that it will be even more intensive and more successful once that there is a peace agreement on this major confrontation.
Yes.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Mr. Simonovic, I wanted to ask you about the UN's human rights due diligence policy. And because in the past the mission had supported units of the South Sudanese army and police, is your office or is the mission keeping track of allegations against particular commanders and units so that if things were to return to a normal state, they wouldn't in fact end up providing support to the same units? And if you can, is your office involved in the implementation of the human rights due diligence policy in MONUSCO and its potential assistance to the Congolese army in fighting the FARDC? It said that two generals are on the red list, but it's resulting in the UN not participating in taking the fight to the FDLR with all of their abuses. What's the role of your office in that? And thanks a lot.
Thank you for this question. It is quite important to clarify. Human rights due diligence policy is not a policy of OHCHR or High Commission of OHCHR. It is Secretary General's policy. So it creates obligations for the whole United Nations system. Do we as OHCHR have an important role in this? Yes, we do. So in DRC, we do gather evidence about human rights violations and involvement in some troops led by certain commanders in human rights violations. And those information are being stored. Of course, in MONUSCO, we'd had more time to have such banks of information than we have in South Sudan. But as you have noticed, we do gather information on human rights violations. They do serve for public reporting, but certainly will also be used for human rights due diligence policy and the assessment whether certain forms of support can be provided for all security forces, being police, national security, or the army.
But is your office asked to give a kind of a recommendation of if a particular unit should be supported or not? I'm thinking of this 41st Battalion in the DRC and the Minova rapes. I hadn't known until recently, but it was now said that support was suspended to them. Do you play a role down in that kind of decision making, or do you just turn over your information and leave it up to DPK or the mission?
Well, it's collaborative effort in which both DPKO and others participate, sharing their information. And I think it's good that it is done in such a way. What is also important to note that the whole idea of human rights due diligence is not to cut the list of security forces that we support shorter, but to influence their behavior. So in case that we have a unit that does not have a clean human rights record, we do not simply reject support. We try to identify what could be the mitigating measures which certain unit should do, or certain force should do, in order to be able to enjoy our support. And it could be to have commanders that were not involved in human rights violations, or to provide certain training to soldiers, which would include human rights training, or some other forms of mitigating measures. And of course, sometimes, although some mitigating measures have been introduced, still there are some violations. In that cases, quite often a mitigating measure is that there is some action taken against ones who have perpetrated those violations. So it's a sign of commitment that violations will not be tolerated, and if it's necessary, there are some additional measures introduced to reduce the risk of further violations.
Yes, Kevin?
Thanks. Just one other thing. Has your investigations encompassed the role of outside forces? Has your investigation encompassed the role of outside forces in South Sudan, specifically Ugandan troops? Do you have any evidence of Ugandan involvement in human rights violations?
Well, we are monitoring all issues that are related to violations, and I hope that we will be to say something more on the issue in incoming reports.
Thanks very much. I guess it's one last question.
Last.
Mr. Simonovic, I would like to ask for some clarification about a comment you made on human rights, not related to South Sudan. Following the Security Council meeting on human rights in the DPRK, you were asked whether the Kirby Report was legally adequate or solid, and you said it would not meet the threshold that was necessary to hold up as evidence in a court of law. And since then, according to the New York Times, one of the defectors upon whom the Kirby Report was based has changed his story and retracted what he had to say. So how would that affect the solidity or the, shall I say, reliability of the Kirby Report as a basis for the referral to the Security Council and possibly to the ICC?
Yes, you're quite right. I did state that that report is based on application of serious standards for human rights investigations. However, that these standards do not reach the threshold that is used in legal proceedings. So I would say that it's most unfortunate that there were some later information that were contradicting some findings. However, I do not think that it affects overall results and recommendations of the so-called Kirby Report. It is unfortunate. We do our due diligence when involved in human rights investigations when we do it ourselves as OHCHR. So I believe did Judge Kirby and the group of independent experts. However, there is always a possibility that some elements, some pieces of the puzzle simply are not fully accurate. However, I do believe that overall the whole puzzle was reflecting pattern of allegations that are taking place in DPRK.
Thanks, everyone.